I'm kind of homesick for a country which I've never been before. No sad goodbyes will there be spoken. Time won't matter anymore. Beulah land, I'm longing for you, and someday on thee I'll stand. There my home shall be eternal. Beulah land, sweet Beulah land.
I'm looking now across the river, where my faith will end inside. There's just a few more days to labor, then I'll take my heavenly flight.
Beulah land, I am longing for you, and someday on thee I'll stand. There my home shall be eternal. Beulah land, sweet Beulah land. Beulah land, Beulah land, Beulah land, sweet Beulah land.
Now, Psalm 139, I hope the Lord will help us tonight in what we're going to say and what I feel like that He wants me to say. It's a little bit it's a little bit different from how I normally do things. We're creatures of habit. I'm a creature of habit, and sometimes when things of habit get thrown out of kilter, but we can rely sometimes too much on habit rather than what the Lord wants to do. So that's about all I'll say, and the Lord knows my heart on that. But I really desire, as I read this text, probably one of the most descriptive passages on the omniscience of God you find in Psalm 139. I mean, if you really want to know what God knows, David describes that in Psalm 139, and we'll look at that here in just a moment. And I'm going to have you stand in a minute, not right yet, but in just a minute I'm going to have you stand. But I want to kind of give you my heart behind, if you would, the message. You know, I know revival's coming, and you know, I think it's in my job qualification description in our Constitution and bylaws that I have to preach on revival 2 or 3 weeks out for revival. That's just part of what you have to do. I'm just kidding. It's not. But you know, we try to do that so our mind is working in that. But I'm going to tell you, when I come to Psalm 139, there's something more than just a surface level message if we'll really grab a hold of what the truths are in this psalm. Now, we're going to read a lot of these. I want to read through the whole psalm. And so there's 24 verses, and so you stand with me. We're going to read 24 verses. You can make it, I promise. If you physically can't make it, just sit back down. It'll be okay, and I won't judge you or throw rocks at you. But if you can and are able, let's read in Psalm 139, these 24 verses. And as I read tonight, I hope that you'll open your mind, if you would, and open your heart to what God really would have for us in the service this evening. He said, O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou knowest my down sitting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off. Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word in my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether. Thou hast beset me behind and before, and laid thine hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain unto it. Whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. Yea, the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike unto thee. For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. Listen, by the way, let me take a pause for a minute. If there's ever been a cause to stand for life at conception, and the fact that God knows that child, I'm going to tell you, Psalm 139 gives a very vivid description of the creation of mankind. That's not what I'm preaching on, but if you ever need a point of reference, Psalm 139 is a great place in talking about the majesty of God, to know that God has a hand in every single bit of that. As precious as that little child is when they come out, listen, they're precious to God long before that ever takes place. And I'm grateful for that. He says in verse 17, how precious also are thy thoughts unto me, O God. How great is the sum of them. If I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with thee. Surely thou wilt slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, ye bloody men. For they speak against thee wickedly, and thine enemies take thy name in vain. Do not I hate them, O Lord, that hate thee? Am not I grieved with those that rise up against thee? I hate them with a perfect hatred. I count them mine enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Brother Sean, take us to the Lord in prayer, if you would. Amen. Thank you so much for standing as we read the scriptures tonight. I begin to think about what do we look for when we think about revival, or what comes to our mind. Now, to most of us, revival, or the process, that's not really a good word, but you understand what I'm saying. We kind of know what to expect, right? Most of it have been around, a lot of us, we're going to come together and we're going to have a meeting, and we're going to, for a lot of, it's just going to be like Sunday 3 days in a row. That's kind of how people look at what revival is. But I want to challenge you, and I really, if I could implore you to look a little past the surface of what we get, this mindset of what revival really is, to see what it truly is. We're looking for an emotional sign. We're looking for an emotional evidence, or a sign that, oh man, it was extraordinarily good to be in service this week. And I'm going to tell you, I hope that we can come and enjoy the meeting. I mean that. But revival is not just that which is on the surface. As a matter of fact, that which is on the surface comes way down the road past genuine revival. And my heart tonight is really to look at this thing, the idea behind a renewal. A renewal. Something that at one time maybe has gotten broken or dilapidated, and now there is a renewing process of that which has been broken or tarnished or tainted, or maybe there is just something to keep it in check to make sure that where we are is where we ought to be. Now, I said that because I want us to look at this. The principle and the premise of a believer's life tonight is to follow Jesus. That's the whole purpose which you and I live, is to follow Jesus Christ. That's the whole purpose. If you're saved by the grace of God, you have determined in your heart that I'm going to be a follower, I'm going to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And so anything that we do should build upon that relationship with that motive and that mindset. Listen, we ought to seek in our heart to please God. Now, I mean that. Now, we say that, and listen, I'm praying the Lord will help me. My mind is running 10,000 different directions, and I want to get settled where God wants me to be. But let me tell you that we say that a lot of times in church, and we know how to say amen. We know how to say amen at the right place. We know how to smile. We know how to testify. But at the end of the day, man, our heart of hearts ought to desire to please God. And if our heart genuinely desires to please God, then God is going to have to do a work in our life so that we are able and aware that we might please God. I'm going to tell you this, we're not going to have revival, and I'm going to say this a move. We're not going to have revival if we're so consumed with us that we can't take a look at who God is and who God wants for us to be. It's just not going to happen. Listen, if there's when the psalmist says this, when David says this, I want you to see what David is actually asking of God. Now we know how to ask God. You have not because you ask not, but I want us to look at what David is actually asking of God. You know, we say this, God, give me revival. But it's more than that if you're going to have revival. I want you to see what David is asking God. Actually, if you want to get technical with it, David is not asking God, David is telling God. Now, I'm not saying he's commanding God. You don't point your finger in the face of God and say, God, do this. But what David is doing is he's saying, God, I want you to do this. He's not saying, God, will you do this? He is sharing his heart with God and saying, God, do this in my life. It really is. It's a commanding terminology. If you look at back to the original languages, it's not a question, God, would you search me? But he says, God, search me. God, do this for me. Now, you understand the weight and the significance when you look at things like that. He's not going to God and say, God, take it or leave it. It's if he says, God, you have to do this. God, there's a longing within my heart. And listen to what he says in verse number 22. He says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. Now, when you look at this, he is asking God, not to do something on the outside. God, don't do it. I'm not asking you to make me rich, wealthy, smart. Why? God, I'm not talking about on the outside. He said, but God, search me and try me. I'm going to tell you, when you get down to the seriousness of what he's asking God to do, he's saying, God, I want you to, the word search comes from a word that, it's a word that we can kind of understand, or it's a picture of this word. Has anybody ever been through a tunnel? Them toll roads. You go through them tunnels to get to them toll roads. If you ever go up to West Virginia, you're going to go through two of them if you're going to get to that state. And you're going to go through two of them that way. But tunnels are really an amazing thing. I like to know the history of them. Sometimes they'll show pictures, you know, and they'll show that how they mined them out. And we had the opportunity to go to the Hoover Dam this past summer, and how they started the canals that behind that. They channeled from one side and the other side through a mountain and met in the middle. When you think about it, they were doing that with mules and wagons. You know, they wasn't using computer animated. I mean, they were literally, they had to use math and think. You know, and it's a carving away, but you look at those tunnels, or you look at how oftentimes a train track will go and it'll cut through a mountain somewhere. They literally had to cut to get to the heart of where they wanted that road to be. That's exactly what he means when he says, God, search me. He said, God, cut to the heart of who I am. And I'm going to tell you this, if we're really going to get to God, being what we ought to be before God, rather, then we're going to have to be willing for God to cut to the heart of where we're at. And that's what David is saying. He said, God, search me. Search me. I wrote this down. When we talk about revival, when we talk about what it's like, and I'm using that word because really what we're talking about a strengthening of a relationship that we have with God. Now, if you're here tonight and you don't know Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, I'll reiterate what I say just about every service. That is step number one. You cannot have revival if you do not have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Listen, if all you have is religion, and a religious experience, and you don't know Jesus Christ, you have not made a decision that through salvation I am going to become a follower and identifier of this man Jesus Christ who loved me and gave himself for me. If you don't have that relationship, you don't need revival, you need salvation. But when we talk about this terminology of revival, I want us to think of it from this point forward as a relationship and my relationship with God. And I would ask you this question: just how deep does your relationship run? You know, I'm afraid a lot of times that relationship with God, even among the average church member, can be that's very shallow. That's very surface driven. You say, what do you mean? We want God to answer our prayer, but let's don't meddle in our life. I want God in my life when everything's going bad. But God, if it's going good, you know, I mean, after all, you'll give me the desire of my heart, God. So let me twist Scripture to make it fit my life so I feel better about things. I promise you I'm not trying to be mean-spirited. I'm really not. But I'm going to tell you something. If we're going to be a genuine in the relationship that God desires for us to have and that we should have a desire in our heart to have, then we're going to have to say, God, search me. Get past the surface. And God, I'm talking about an in-depth search and an in-depth walk with God. And that's what the psalmist asked for. I want you to notice this. It's personal. It's personal. He says, search me. Search me. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have a hard time pointing out anybody else's faults. If you want to know what your faults are, just ask me. I can tell you. Man, I don't like to think about my own. Smile a little bit. I wouldn't do that. It's easier to pick out somebody else. It don't hurt as bad. It don't hurt as bad for me to tell you what you need to fix. But I tell you what hurts is whenever I take a long, hard look within the depths of my heart, those things that nobody else knows, those desires that nobody else is aware of, the secret, the hidden things of the heart that nobody else knows. Man, when I get to looking at those things that are really genuinely hindering or making my relationship what it ought to be. Let me tell you, for us to have what God desires for us to have in way of relationship, it's going to have to take a personal, deep look into who we are and who God wants for us to be. All right, so let's look at it. What is our heart? That is the innermost part, the seat of our emotion, our will, our appetite. We understand heart. We understand what heart is. You know, you can fool somebody as to the appetites of your character, who you are. You can fool them. Just like you can on the outside with something as simple as food. Some of you put a smile on your face. You went to somebody's house and they fixed something and you don't like it. But you like the person. And so they set it from you. They set it in front of you and you eat it. You suffer through it. You're so good at it, they offer you a second helping. Let me tell you what you've done. You have just faked what your genuine appetite is. Now, I'm going to tell you, if we're not careful, we can try to do the same thing before God, but God knows our heart. I can put on a show, but in my heart of hearts, that's not what I want. That's not what I desire. That's really not the craving. And David said, God, he said, search me, oh God, and know my heart. He said, God, get way down in. God, way down inside to where I've hid that from everybody else. And maybe even I've become calloused over in it myself. He said, God, get way down in my heart. And search me, oh God, and know my heart. And then he said, my thoughts. That which works out of the desires of my heart. He said, God, I want you to search me, oh God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. The word search means to examine thoroughly, like the cutting away to the mountains. God, this layer, check this layer, this layer, this layer, this layer. We put up a lot of layers, don't we? Man, we cover it with everything from desire to flesh to emotion to everything. Excuse, God, search me. Know that, thoroughly examine me. You know what it's like to thoroughly examine something, right? You know, you can examine something, say it's all right. Can I ask you, this is not a good thing, but I know some of you, I know Brother Chris is a truck driver. Pre-trip inspections. You've done one or two of them in your day? And I'm going to tell you something, that's something that's very easy to casually glance at. Maybe not for Brother Chris. He might go over it with a fine-tooth comb because they're his trucks, and if he's driving it, that's your life that you're driving on. But I'm going to tell you something. There's a lot of times that you can take your vehicle to a mechanic and say, hey, I got this problem, and they just kind of skim over it, charge you a fee, diagnostic fee, and you go home and your car's still broke. You know, you kind of look and say, oh, you know, check the tires, you know, and what you should check the tire pressure, you know, check the tread depth and all that. You end up going, oh, it's got air in it. You see, that's not examining thoroughly. I'm afraid if we're not careful, what we do is we come to church, we hear a little sermon, and we'll come and say, yeah, I think I'm okay, and we'll go back on ourselves. He said, listen, that's not going to cut it. The psalmist said, hey, listen, he said, I want you to search me thoroughly, God. Don't leave anything unturned. Now, I'm going to tell you something. That's a painful thing. For God to really get that. You know, it's like saying, God, I want you to be nitpicky with me. God, I want you to be very thorough. Don't leave anything out. Understand what he's asking God to do. He's asking God into the depth of the recesses that nobody else knows about. He's asking God to look at the places that he wouldn't know, any of his servants, any of his wives, any of his sons. Nobody would know these things. And he said, God, I want you to search me. I want you to do it thoroughly, God. To try me is a word that means scrutinize. It comes from it's the idea behind how they test the purity of gold. And they would heat that gold to where they could refine it, and the impurities would come up to the surface. Things that no normal eye would not see without the scrutiny of heat. He said, I want you to search me, God, and I want you to try me. I want you to search me. That's what he's asking for. That's what he's looking for. He said, God, you're going to have to I want you to get to the depths and to the recesses of my soul. God, I'm tired of having just this scratch the surface relationship. He said, God, I want you to get way down in and to search me for who I am. Can I tell you, let me ask you, what kind of relationship do we really desire to have with God? Do we want just the surface relationship? Do we want the same just casual encounter? The same kind of relationship that we would have with somebody that we just meet occasionally at work? Man, I wonder how many relationships and how our relationship with God would compare to a casual relationship. You know, we only see him every 3 or 4 days. How many people that profess the name of Christ, they only talk to him every 3 or 4 days? You know, Sunday morning, occasional Sunday night, Wednesday night here, there. That's it. They don't fellowship with him in a day. Listen, I'm not talking about your church attendance. I'm talking to the Wednesday night crowd. I know who I'm talking to. I'm not talking about your church attendance. I'm talking about a deep walk with God. We've got to get past just the shallow examination of checking off a few boxes and saying, have I asked God to examine my heart? Have I allowed him access to my heart? Have I said, God, here I am. God, I need you to do this for me, God. I know it's going to hurt. God, I know I'm not going to like it. It's not going to be pleasant because I know the kind of man that I am. But God, I need you to do this. I'm going to tell you, that's going to be the beginning of having the relationship that God wants for us to have. It is a brutal honesty with ourselves and God that, by the way, God already knows it. God already knows it. Now, I want to move from that to not only what is he asking, but I want to take a look at who he's asking. Well, preacher, that's dumb. He's asking God. I know who he's asking. Next point, we can get out of here. No, who is he asking? You see, I think the value in him being able to trust God with this question is the appreciation that he had for the God in whom he was asking. Don't miss this. A big portion of this psalm is wrapped up in the majesty of who God is. Can I tell you something this evening? We serve a majestic God. We serve a magnificent God. There's no God like our God. There's no God in heaven and earth like our God. There's no God like the God of Israel. There's no God like the God of the church. There's no God like Father God. There's none like Him. And it's because of the person of God that David knew God to be, that David said, God, I trust you to enter into the depths and the recesses of my soul, to examine me with scrutiny, that I might be who you want me, and by the way, God, who you already know me to be. Listen to how David describes Him. I like this. As David begins to talk about God, David begins this psalm, he begins to sing. He says in verse number 6, now we're going to go back and get the other ones, but he says in verse number 6, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. He said, it is high, and I cannot attain unto it. Let me put it in Davie County language. He said, I just can't wrap my mind around it. He said, when I begin to think about God, he said, it's too wonderful for me. He said, I can't attain to and fathom the vastness of who God is and what God can do. He goes on to say, let me see if I can read this. I didn't write it down. He said, marvelous are thy works in verse number 14. He said, man, what a God. What a God. You and I need to have the right view of God if we're going to open up our heart to say, God, search me. Listen, can I tell you this? And I'll move on. You can trust God with your heart. You can trust God with it. We've got to get past this mentality. And I think we've been beaten into this mentality that God is angry with you. I think we've got to get past that. Now, let me tell you something. God is angry with sin. Make no doubt about it. God is angry with sin. All through the pages of Scripture, you can find a righteous and a just and a holy God who is angry at sin. God is not going to excuse the sinner for this false connotation of love in which the world tries to depict. That's not a biblical God. But let me tell you something, child of God. If you're saved by the grace of God, God is not your enemy. You've got to get past this mentality that God is continually angry at you. And that God is just looking to punish me, to get me back on track so I can be a good little soldier in His army and conform and look like. You got to get past that thinking. That's not the God we serve. God already knows you. And yet through God's grace, God has given you an opportunity to know yourself so that you can become what God desires for you to be. Somewhere down the line, we picture God as this angry, and I don't mean to be crude, but we picture God as an angry old man in a rocking chair that's always hateful, and He's always got this scowl upon His face. That's not the God we serve. He is a God of love. He is a God of mercy. He is a God of kindness. He's a marvelous God. He's a wonderful God. He's a loving God. And I'm going to tell you, if you're a child of God, He loves you. That's why David can say, God, the God that loves me and the God that's invested in me, the God that created me from the womb of my mother in darkness, the God that formed me, the God that wrote down my members in a book. He said, God, you're the God that I trust. Listen, I wish we could wrap our mind around that. The reality of who God really is. Man, we've got to get out of this mindset that, God is looking to do us evil. God is just waiting around the corner for us to mess up. If you're honest with yourself, how many times have we felt that way? How many times have we thought about, because God is so holy, and He is holy. And don't leave here thinking, I'm trying to bring God down to our level. That's not it at all. But I'm trying to understand that we have a heavenly Father. A heavenly Father. I don't know of any earthly dad that genuinely loves his children that is seeking the demise of his child. I mean, just hoping they'll mess up so that he can use his brand new belt. Man, I got this good, man, this would be a good whooping belt. Man, I hope they hurry up, mess up. I want to use it. Now, we'd say, man, preacher, that's kind of borderline child abuse. You might have grounds for some of it. That's not the God we serve. God has equipped us. God has given us every opportunity. God give us a Savior who ever liveth to make intercession for those He loves. I'm telling you, we've got to get our mindset away from the fact that God is continually angry and waiting for us to fall and happy when we do. That's not the God we serve. Now, why is that important? Because it's this God that David comes to in the knowledge of who God is, in His omniscience, that David said, God, you have to search me. God, I want you to try me. God, know my thoughts and know my heart and try my thought. God, he said, you have to do this because of who David knew God to be. A couple things I want us to look at tonight. God already knows you. Notice what he says in verse number 1. Oh Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. God, you already know me. As David's praying, now there's a uniqueness to this. As David's praying, he said, God, I know you know me. You've already done what I'm asking you to do. He said, thou hast done this. And so God already knows if you would. Now, I like these verses, and listen to what David testifies of. He said, God, thou hast searched me and known me. He said, thou knowest my downsitting and my uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off. He said, God, you're way up in heaven. He said, there ain't nothing I think of that you don't know. There's nothing that I devise in my heart that takes you by surprise. God, you already know it. God, you see when I wake up of a morning. God, you see when I lay down at night. Can I tell you, he is picturing the watch care of a heavenly Father that's invested in his child. He said, God, you know when I get up. You know when I go to bed. He said, God, you know what I'm thinking before I ever get it out of my mouth. He said, thou compassest my path, my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways. That word compasseth, that phrase, thou compassest my path. It's a picture of a sifting. Now, I don't want to be too carnal, and I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand because you incriminate yourself. Anybody ever lied to your parents? You ever lied to them? Oh, I wasn't there. Well, I seen you in the car. No, you just said you saw somebody else. You know, and some of you is good liars. That just shows how far away from God you are. You good liars. Not just you're a liar, you're good at it. You know what he tells God? He said, or what he says? He said, God, thou siftest. What? You know the truth, God. You're able to pick out when I'm not really being genuine. God, you're able to pick out when I'm over here. He said, God, thou compasseth my, you know my walk, my path, how I'm walking. God, you're able to discern the good ways and the evil ways in my life. He said, that's the God I'm serving. God already knows. This is what he says. He said, for there's not a word in my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether. He said, God, there ain't nothing I can say that you don't already know. What I'm thinking and what I'm saying. Can I tell you this? Listen, God already knows. We just need to wake up to the fact that God already knows. We just need God to show us. God already knows us. Listen, we can put on our suit of religion. We can put on our suit of good works. And we can fool the crowd around us. You can fool the preacher. The preacher can fool you. But can I tell you, there's a God in heaven who sifteth us. He knows the good versus the evil. He knows what's in our heart. Listen, before we ever get it out of our mouth, God already knows who we are. This is the God that he's praying. God, search me. God, get past the surface. God, get down to where it's genuine and where it's real. He said, thou hast beset me behind and before and laid thine hand upon me. Can I tell you, there's not one area of your life, my friend, that God doesn't already know. There's not one little inkling of who you are that God does not already know. Listen, if you're in this room tonight and you don't know Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, listen, God already knows that. That's right. He already knows. If you're here and listen, you're wayward, you're not where you ought to be with God, He already knows that. There's sin in your life. There's rebellion in your heart. Listen, there's a brokenness about you. God already knows everything about you. He already knows it. And so he talks about who God is. Then listen to what he says. He said, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. God, I just can't wrap my brain around it. God, I can't attain unto it, but God, I sure do believe it. But then I want you to see how precious that God is to him. How precious God really is to him. You see, when I made mention that we've got to get past this idea that God is just seeking to do us evil because God's angry with us, I want you to listen to what he says. He said, whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? The word spirit and the word presence there are kind of synonymous, if you would. But you know, when we see the word spirit, it's not capital, it's not talking about the Holy Spirit per se, although he is a person of the Trinity. But when we talk about the presence of God and the Spirit, the word spirit is that which gives indication to breath. Have you ever been so close to someone that you're in this area, and maybe it's dark, maybe, I don't know, maybe some of you that have spouses in here, you know what it's like to be in the middle of night, and you can't see your spouse, but you can hear him breathing. You just hear him breathing. I'm not talking about snoring, but you can hear him breathing. And you can just... Can I tell you what he says? He said, God, he said, I know you're here. There's times in my life, God, I can sense your presence, and I can just hear you breathing. Listen, can I tell you, that's an intimate relationship with a holy God. He said, listen, he said, where should I go from thy spirit? Where can I go, God, that you're not right there? For lack of better terms, breathing down my neck. God, you're not there right over my shoulder to where I can hear you. You say, what's he doing? He is expressing the value of the presence of God in his life. Now, lest you think that's a bad thing, how many places have you think had David ever been that he was grateful that the presence of God was there? As David is facing his deepest event, as David is standing with his sling and his stone, and Goliath is standing with his sword drawn, don't you think it done David some good? Hey, to feel the breath of God over his shoulder, hey, to let him know, hey, David, I'm right here. It's okay. It's fine. Listen, I'm telling you, the presence of God is genuine in David's life. And David said, God, the one that I know that your presence is real, he said, God, I want you to search me, and I want you to try me. And then he makes this statement. He said, whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? He said, God, I can't get away from it. And by the way, he's not saying that in a negative fashion. It's not that he's trying to necessarily. He said, if I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. He said, if I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. He said, if I take the wings of the morning, dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. He's always talking about a God that won't let him alone. Listen, I'm grateful that even when we backslide, even when we get to the place that we're cold on God, listen, if we'll just allow God to, God is right there. Why? He's not going to leave his children alone. He's not going to forsake us and to leave us to our own demise. I'm thankful. That's the God that we serve. And when he begins to cry out to God to search him, it's this God. Then he says this. He said, and if I say, sure, the darkness shall cover me. What about when he tries to hide from God? Man, God won't see me over here. God, I'm going to take this darkness, and I'm going to try to play hide and seek with God, and God won't see me. Listen to what he said. He said, if I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. I can't help but picture some of them shows, you see them guys when they're escaping from prison, and they trying to run down the prison yard, you know, and all of a sudden the guy that's sitting up in the tower, he hits him with that spotlight, and man, it's pitch dark everywhere else, but everywhere that dude runs, man, that spotlight's right on him. That's kind of what David's saying. He said, God, I can't hide. God, I can't hide from you. God, you're everywhere. You know me. Kind of like as a child, your mama always said, you know, I got eyes in the back of my head. And it's like she always knew. It's like she always knew. I mean, how did they even know I was there? It's like let me tell you something. God knows. But that's a good thing. It's a good thing. Why? Because there's times that because your parents knew something, they kept you from hurting yourself because you're a bonehead. Listen, there's times that God knowing and God caring and God not leaving to my own destruction, that I can look and say, man, God was sure good to me. Even when I was trying to hide from him, I couldn't do it. He said, yea, the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day, and darkness as the light are both alike unto thee. He can see just as good in the dark as he can in the light. Listen, God's not affected by me trying to hide. God's not affected by me trying. So you say, preacher, what are you saying? Can I tell you, God already knows you. But it's a good thing because He's a great God. He's a good God. He's a God that's ever present. He's a God that desires for His children to walk with Him. Listen to what He says in verse number 17. Man, I'm about out of time. I got to rapidly finish. He begins to talk about how that God created him, how God was invested at him at creation. I'm going to tell you something. If you think about how that you got here and that God made you, he begins to think about how that God, while he was conceived in darkness, God was there. God wrote down in heaven, okay, David's got an arm and David's got a leg, and however you want to say it. Man, and God was instrumental in all of David. And I want you to listen to what he says in verse number 17. How precious also are thy thoughts unto me, O God. He said, God, that you'd think about me. God, that you would invest in me. And then, God, that your thoughts are precious to me and my thoughts of you are precious to me. He said, God, you're just a great God. He said, if I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. Now listen to the last part he says. He said, when I awake, I'm still with thee. Can I tell you something, child of God? You ought to rejoice in that fact. Even in our darkness, he said, when I wake, you ever had a bad dream? Sometimes life's just a bad dream. And you know what David said? He said, when I wake up, God, you're still there. God, when I faltered, when I fallen, when I failed, God, you're still there. Can I tell you something? Listen, God knows our struggles. God knows our doubts. We're not going to hide them from God. God knows our pain. God knows our suffering. God knows our heartache. God knows our victories. God knows our struggles. And yet David said, in God, when I wake up, I'm still with you. Now it's with this mindset of God and who God is that David simply says, God, I want you to search me. God, I want you to try me. God, I want you to know me. Because of that, David's got a desire to depart. Can you give me 5 minutes? David's got a desire to depart. You know what he begins to list? He begins to list about the evil people that are against, listen to it, his God. Now don't miss this thought. David begins to take this thing of sonship and relationship personally. Man, if we could get to that place, it'd change how we live. When we begin to take it personal. You ever had somebody hurt somebody that you love? You watch a mother. Just watch a mama. Y'all ever heard, well, mama bear is going to come out? You watch a mama. She'll take a lot of abuse. She can sit by, listen, you can attack her husband all day, but you touch them babies, buddy, and you've had a bad day. It's going to be on. You say, why? Man, that's her child. She takes it personally. Listen, when we get to the place that our relationship with God is so close that we begin to take the enemies of God personally, I believe it'll change our conduct. You know why? We'll stop rubbing shoulders with them. I'm not talking about witnessing to them. I'm not talking about loving them in Jesus and sharing the gospel, but I'm talking about leaving fellowship with God and yoking up with their lifestyle and their choices and their decisions. Listen, if we want to know where we stand with God, maybe we ought to take some inventory about where our priorities are with God. How much do the things that offend God offend us? How much do the things that please God please us? Listen to what he says. You think David is just vainly saying these words? He says, surely that will slay the wicked, O God. You're good, you're righteous, you're holy. Sinners won't escape, God. You know you're going to slay the wicked. He said, depart from me, therefore, ye bloody men. He said, man, if that's what you are, you facing the judgment of God, I want no part of it. Man, there's an outward evidence of an inward relationship. He said, man, I got to get away from that. He said, for they speak against thee wickedly. Why do you want away from them, David? Because they're against my God. David, why won't you associate with them? I'll tell you why, because they made themselves to be enemies of my God because of the wickedness and the things they're doing apart from God. Man, there's a lot of preaching right here. Practical preaching. How many of God's people have long since walked away from a pure and holy relationship with God because we'd rather have things and our ways in the world and we excuse it? You know why? Because we're just shallow on the outside and we're not allowing God to get to the depths of who we are. Listen to verse 21. Listen to the language of David. Do not I hate them, O Lord, that hate thee? That's plain. Oh, preacher, we shouldn't hate anything. Listen, we can hate the wickedness. He said, God, they hate you. They hate you. Listen, I can promise you this. If somebody hates your children, if they come up to your children and say, I hate your guts, I hope you die, I'm going to tell you, they're not going to be on your Christmas card list. You're not going to spend all your weekends with them. You're not going to spend all your money on them. You're not going to invest all your time with them. Why? Because they hate the one you love. He said, I hate him. But listen to what he says, with a perfect hatred. Complete. He said, I don't even like him a little bit. I'm not even going to give a little bit of room. He said, God, I hate him with complete hatred. I completely detest everything about them. Why? Because there's wickedness in their life and they're against you, God. Now, it's with this mindset that David makes his request that we started with. That David states to God, God, I need you to do this for me. What's he say? He said, God, search me. Search me, oh God. In light of the fact that you already know this, you're a great God to me. God, you've done so much for me. And God, you've never left me. You've never forsaken me. And God, evil will be judged, and evil hurts the heart of God. He said, therefore, God, search me. Therefore, God, try me. You know why? David said, that's not what I want to be, God. God, that's not what I want to be. Get down to the inside. And God, make sure none of that is in me. Now see, there I believe that when we see the whole reason, the whole unfolding of Psalm 139, I think we can look at it and say, man, David is sincere in having a deep walk and relationship with God. Not this shallow surface, come to church, not come to church, everything's good, and live any way we want to live, and do anything we want to do, and say anything we want to say, behave it. No, not spend time with God. He said, no, God. He said, I don't want any of that to be in my life. Listen, I'm not preaching on church attendance. I'm not preaching on church membership. I'm not preaching on any of that. I'm talking about having a deep relationship with God that's real and genuine, that goes deeper than just on the surface. Why did he ask him for this? He said, and see if there be any wicked way in me. God, even a little bit. God, maybe a thought that nobody knows I'm having. Maybe a struggle that nobody knows I'm having. God, maybe a doubt. Maybe whatever. God, but if there's evil in me whatsoever, he said, I want you to point it out to me. And then he said, I want you to lead me in the way everlasting. He said, God, I want from here on out to the way into the recesses of eternity, into the future, God, I want you to lead me. Just like he said, you took my hand. He said, God, I want you to lead me. I want you to carry me on. Revival, a right relationship with God. You know where it's going to start? It's going to start with these two words, search me. It's going to go on with these two words, try me. He said, God, but it's going to have to start with God. You're going to have to do it. You're going to have to show it. Is that really what we want? Oh, listen, I want to have a good meeting. I enjoyed Sunday before last. We had good testimonies, good singing. I enjoyed all of that. But listen, that's an outward emotion is not the sign of an inward revival. But what is it? Do we really want to be so right with God that there's no wicked way within us whatsoever? Where's it going to start? Search me, O God, and try me. And that's my prayer for me, because it's personal. It's personal. I know my failures, let alone what God will dig up when He starts to mine my soul. But listen, if I'm ever going to have the relationship that a loving and a merciful God wants me to have with Him, that's what He wants for me. He's not waiting for me to fail. He's waiting for me to submit and say, God, fix me. Listen, if I'm ever going to have it, it's going to start with search me. I want you to stand with me tonight, and